Yo, and today I am joined by the amazing Sarah Brown. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to chat with little old me.
Oh, kia ora, brother. Always happy to meet up with you.
How are you doing down in Christchurch today?
Good. Yeah, it's a beautiful day here in Otahi, and we are busy as usual. So it's a good day.
So I met Sarah at a wānanga that you and your partner, Matt Brown, who I've had on the show before, put on down in Otahi about working with men in order to end men's violence, which is part and part. It's like the key message of what you do with your, what do you call it? Social enterprise? She is not your rehab. Is that how do you
Call
term?
it? I guess it's a kaupapa and a movement. I think that's how we frame it.
Look at me, I'm more like it's a social enterprise, and you're like it's a kaupapa and
That
a
sounds
movement.
really technical, like a lot more technical than we are.
Well, She Is Not Your Rehab has become like a global conversation starting brand.
Yeah.
So I suppose it is a movement. And it's a really powerful movement. And I really want to talk about the why and the how. So for you, for people who aren't familiar with your kaupapa, where does it all start?
Well, it started with my husband's story, obviously. He grew up in a home of severe domestic violence, sexual abuse, which resulted in many different things. And so for him, he was always kind of someone who wanted to change the narrative in his community about how to talk about those sorts of issues. Now, he's Samoan, but born here in New Zealand. And when I met him, he kind of just told me that in his community those things weren't talked about. And I actually met Matt through my other work. So I was working for an aid and development agency for a few years, and I was the event manager for New Zealand. And I met him when I was doing work around child trafficking. And we did we partnered with different aid and development agencies in third world countries. So that's how I met him, because at the time he hates me telling this story, but he was actually in a band, a hip hop kind of group, and they went around New Zealand at schools and churches, and they would share their stories, and there was a kind of a group of them, and they were all Polynesian. And anyway, I remember hearing his story for the first time, and I was like thinking, oh my gosh, I'd never heard anyone talk so raw and open about that kind of stuff. And this is way back before social media made a thing of people sharing stories. So just to hear a brown brother, from his neighborhood, I guess, talk about the stuff that he had gone through, I was just actually blown away. And I kind of just knew then that I wanted to utilize my networks or whatever I had to support him to do that. Because when I said to him, the things you're talking about are not popular really to talk about for anyone to hear. You're talking about being raped as a child. And at the time when I first heard him, it was in a church setting. So it was a church he was speaking at, and it was like a youth group, a Polynesian youth group. And we had supported this tour, and I remember afterwards, like just looking around at all the kids that had listened to him and knowing that there was so many in the room that identified with his story. And I said to him, like, why do you kind of, put yourself out there like that? And he was just like, because there's so much shame in our silence. And I know that, my story is not the only one, like heaps of people have it. And so I will, I guess, put myself out there and kind of spread my message that there is hope and redemption past, surviving all that kind of stuff. So that's sort of how I guess my first interaction with Matt, and we became friends for 4 years. We were really good friends. I moved away to Rarotonga, and we still stayed friends. And then I ended up moving back to New Zealand and down to Otahi to support his business, which was barbering at the time. And he just said, I just plan to use my business and my platform to be just another avenue for men to have these conversations, because in my neighborhood, we don't talk about this stuff and it's destroying us. So many men are becoming incarcerated, joining gangs, addicted. He's like, we're all just trying to survive the trauma we've all gone through, and no one's coming for us. So I'm going to, create my little barbershop movement to do that. And so I think I always just really felt like, yeah, I'm on your team. and I'm going to do this with you. So that's how
And
it was.
and you obviously fell in love and got.
Well, that was eventually. That was like after being friends for 4 years, he decided that he loved me more than a friend, and he told me one night, and I was like, what? I was so shocked. I loved him too, but I hadn't really opened myself up to that idea, because I'd always thought that we were just friends, and that's sort of how it went. And yeah, and then we ended up dating, and we had our son, and then got married quite quickly. So here we are. And we've been married.
How long ago did you get married?
We've been married for 6 years.
6 years. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And you've got 3 kids?
Yeah.
Yes.
So my oldest is at university. So I've got a uni child. She's doing a fine arts degree at UC. And then I've got a 6-year-old, Angelo, who starred in our Dear Mr. Rock video. And then we've got a little baby girl, Frida, who is 3.
So you're managing 3 children,
Yeah,
a barbershop, and a global movement.
Yeah, and I study full-time as well.
Are you? What are you studying?
Oh, well, next year I'll be a registered therapist.
Oh, amazing. And is that
Yes.
growing out of the work you're doing?
Yeah, I did, because we end up working with a lot of people, and I guess I've just always wanted to make sure that I've got the most I can offer who we're supporting. And my passion would be to work with whānau in the system who struggle with the use of violence, because for many that we've worked with, I mean, it's easy just to say, oh, don't do that, go and, live this life. But if you've never seen it, if you've never seen a healthy relationship, if you've never grown up in a home that's free of violence, it's very difficult to probably imagine just how to go off and do that. And so I really do feel for whānau that struggle with intergenerational trauma and violence. And that would be my dream, to kind of work with them in different ways to support them into a life that they have never seen but deserve.
What was your childhood like growing up? Was it violence free?
So physical violence, I never saw, like, I was adopted as a child. So my adopted father never ever hit my adopted mother. But we got hidings regularly. And there was a lot more verbal and emotional violence and abuse. So a lot of that. And so I kind of, like, when I think about like coercive control and feeling like you're walking around on eggshells all the time, that's how I felt growing up, with parents that were very manipulative, and they were quite religious, so quite idealistic with what they wanted us to be and behave like. And if you didn't really fit the mold, then you would get punished a lot. So I grew up in a home like that, and I also really felt no connection or belonging. I grew up with them, and they were Pākehā, New Zealand. I knew I was Māori, but didn't even know who my iwi were, didn't know anything. So I think when I was early teens, I just decided I'm going to leave and go find where I come from. I'm going to find out who I am. And so I couldn't wait. And as soon as I turned 15, I got a job and left home and never went back. Just went and looked for my, where I came from.
Did you find your
Yes.
birth parents?
Yep, I did. And it's been a journey ever since, of reconnection, reclamation, which, I think many adopted people that I've spoken to, it takes your lifetime, really. Because, there's so much research about the first, years of your life being so instrumental to how you form your beliefs about yourself and about the world. And so I think when you grow up really feeling so disconnected and like you don't belong there, it really does something to you. And I think my journey, has been, I guess, probably when I really think about it, it's actually been about learning how to belong to myself, as well as, my whānau and all of that. But yeah, it's been a journey.
Yeah, that's a really nice framing, learning how to belong to myself, because I think many of us in the space of violence prevention or gender equitable outcomes have relatable parallel journeys, right? I think just in general, I think a lot of people, even if they haven't been through the extreme end of trauma, are trying to find themselves in a society and in a system which often makes us feel disconnected from ourselves.
Yeah, definitely.
What does it actively look like? Like, how do people, what is finding yourself? What is dealing with your trauma? What is healing? Because these words we see a lot of on social media, but there's not a lot of how to. And I'm curious to have you unpack that a bit.
Well, for me, my journey probably with healing kind of actually started when I gave birth to my oldest daughter. So I was a teen mum, and I didn't have a good relationship with her dad, and it was just me and her. But I remember the day I gave birth, and I had a long labor and I was tired and all of those things. But I gave birth to her, and later on, everyone had kind of left the room, and I was by myself with her. And I remember just holding her like in my arm and looking down at her. And I just had this really happy but sad feeling, like I thought no one's ever loved me how I love her. I just knew that. And I really felt like I really want to give you the best possible life. I really want to be the mum I never had for you. I really want this, this life that you deserve. Because I looked at her and I thought, man, she just deserves the whole world. And so I really do. I always say that she was the best and biggest invitation to do the healing work, was having her, and just knowing that things hadn't really been very good in my childhood. So I wanted to kind of address them. And I didn't honestly know where to start. You're right. There wasn't, and even back then there wasn't social media. So I started reading books, going on a spiritual journey. I kind of wanted to disband in religious ideology and kind of more go down a spiritual path. I wanted just to identify the feelings I had and how to move through them and accept them, I think. And I started off actually with Louise Hay's books. I don't know if you know her. She started a book called You Can Heal Your Life.
No, ma'am, I didn't know it.
Well, she's this, I guess guru. She's passed away now. But her teaching was about how physical dis-ease in the body was linked to the way we think about ourselves. And from someone who grew up really feeling very rejected, abandoned, unwanted, not belonging, her work was very instrumental in getting me to really think about my own self-talk and about how I guess perceived myself and the kind of language I would speak to myself with. So it was her that actually, her work, it got me to use affirmations. So I used to have all these little affirmations on my wall. And it sounds weird, but that was actually honestly the start of my healing journey. I had these little affirmations like, I'm lovable, I'm valuable, I belong, all these things which I'd never ever thought of or talked to myself like. And I decided to do that because I thought the best way, this has been my healing path. I didn't really have, at the time I wasn't seeing a therapist. I didn't really know what I was doing. I was a broke single mom. So I was just starting with what I had, which was a book. I thought to myself, the best way that Oceana, my daughter, will live her best life is if she sees her mother living her best life. And in that way, I kind of knew I was her biggest role model. And so I didn't have much to go on. I didn't have money. I didn't really have anything. I was working and studying. And I just sort of thought, well, I can start with my self-talk because it's free. So anything that's free is a really good place to begin. And I just started there and just kind of started looking at how it felt to talk to yourself nicely when really my whole life I hadn't. So that's where it started for me. Then I met a therapist, someone that I met who was a therapist. We had this really great relationship. She was an older lady and she impacted my life hugely. And so there were just things which she really helped me with. And then I just went on like any sort of course or anything that I thought I could take something from that. I honestly just followed my curiosity. Anything that I thought, hey, that's cool. I'll go try that and do that. I'll go to a day seminar, I'll read this or whatever. And I was just very open to learning. And it took me years. It took me years and years. Healing is not an overnight thing. Healing is like a path that you're probably always going to be on. And on that path, you're going to find little things, little nuggets, little gems that you're going to pick up, put in your kitty and just move along, and that's going to support you, I think. So that's what it looked like for me.
Being healed's it's a journey, not a destination, huh? To sound perhaps.
Oh, totally. Right. And when I hear people talk about it, it's like they think it's this magic abracadabra thing that you're going to feel good the next day. Like I'm telling you right now, my journey, because in the early days, I've never been into substances. So I've never been drunk in my life. I don't use drugs, like, none of that. Like I don't smoke. So I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't really do anything. But my, I guess, way of coping back in the day was to go to relationship to relationship. So I would have, from quite a young age, I was sexually active from a young age. I had multiple different partners, and I would kind of, I guess, not consciously, but subconsciously, I would look to them to somehow give me validation or belonging, or look to them to make me feel better about myself. And when you have to do the work within yourself, you realize that you're looking for something that really no one else can give you. And so I went on this journey, and I kind of made this promise to myself that I was going to be single, and I would do the work within myself to heal before I would, just jump onto somebody else and expect them to do it for me. And that took me to 7 years being single. So I was single for 7 years before I met Matt and we had a relationship.
Wow. So like no hookups, no dating,
hookups.
like nothing.
Nothing for 7 years. It was supposed to be 1 year. I thought I'm gonna give myself 1 year because I'd never been single that long. And I thought, will I even be able to do it? Like I thought to myself, honestly, my friend challenged me. She's like, you should really give yourself this time. I thought, yeah, you're right. And I did it. I thought, yeah, 1 year, that'll be difficult. 1 year turned into 7 years, Richie. And I was single for that long.
Wow, that's powerful though. Like,
Yeah.
because you will always carry the weight of your past relationships into your next one unless you sit and let that dissolve and do that work, right?
Definitely.
I know that because I did that. Like
Yeah.
I would go from one relationship to another relationship,
Yeah.
or one
I think lots of us
relationship.
do.
Yeah, and it was very unconscious, and
Totally.
it was easier to have someone call me or send me a text and go like, do you want to hang out? And you're like, yeah, I'd way rather to hang out than sit in my bedroom by myself with my existential suffering.
Yeah, exactly. And when you have to actually sit with yourself and you can't deflect or shift anything onto someone else, because that's the thing. A lot of us, we go through from, we survive our own trauma. We jump into a relationship. It's fun in the beginning, but eventually the real you comes out. You have your shit, and then suddenly it's their fault. You blame them. You shift it to them. It's always someone else. You can't do that when you're by yourself. And that's the thing. It was hard. And for 7 years I did it, and I was very focused on my career at the same time. So I loved my work. I had really cool friends. I had a good life. But I remember many nights, like I would do the work within myself. I would sit with the feelings that I didn't want to feel. And I remembered, like, I didn't want to scare my daughter and my sister, who I had guardianship of, who lived with me. So I would go and sit in my car by myself in the driveway and cry and think about the things I wanted to address within myself. But I look back at that time that I gave myself, and I'm so grateful. Like I wouldn't have the relationship and the marriage that I have now had I not had the courage to just be alone and to do the work within myself.
Yeah, that's it, because you would just keep recreating those patterns, and I've seen that happen a lot.
You just recreate what's familiar to you until it becomes conscious. And unfortunately for me, because I had, I'd been adopted from a young age, I innately believed I wasn't worthy of existing. I didn't belong anywhere. No one wanted me. They were always going to reject or abandon me. I would put up walls between myself and other people, and I would never let people too close. So I never really had very close, intimate relationships. Like sex isn't intimacy. You can have sex with people and not be intimate. And that was pretty much my whole, early years of relationships. So I think unless I had done this work, I wouldn't have the life I have now.
Kia ora. Thanks for being so open about that. I think it's really powerful for people to hear that.
Oh, you're welcome.
So all of this pain, do you think it's been a driving force for what you do now? Let's just quickly recap what you do now. You have just launched a book, Is Not Your Rehab, with your husband, Matt. You have a prisons program. You have a huge social media following talking about very difficult topics. What else do you have going on? Am I missing anything?
No, well, in that world, I have a business as well as my sister. I do marketing because my job before I met Matt, I was in comms and marketing and events. So
Right.
I do that as well. It's kind of like my paid job, I guess. Because all this other stuff is not really paid. It's just, co-papa driven, and we're happy to do it. So obviously Matt's a barber. I have a marketing business, and then we do our stuff, separately, just because we're really passionate about it. We don't get paid any wage or salary to do it. But for us, giving back, just being able to use what we've been given, our skill set, our platforms, to, I guess, drive social change. Like, we really believe and want to invest in violence-free communities. And we recognize the fact that the day you plant the seeds is probably not the day you're going to eat the fruit. So this might be our whole lifetime worth of work, and we won't even know if we're very successful. But for us, it's about our children's children's children. And it's, just about investing into them and doing all that we can to break cycles and to help other people to break cycles, so that they can live violence free and in homes that are functional.
Yeah, that's the thing too, right? Like you said, in your own childhood, it wasn't necessarily physical violence between your parents, although it was, you and your siblings suffered violence.
Yeah.
There's a lot of dysfunctionality in the absence of physical violence that I think a lot of people don't necessarily recognize, whether it's shutting people out emotionally or, the coercive control stuff you talked about, or even just parents who aren't abusive per se, but they're just absent.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people are absent in their own ways. Like, I know now that even I can recognize that when I've worked a lot and I'm really tired, I just want to zone out and be on social media. And you know what I mean? Like, I'm not a drinker. And so I that's not my drug of choice, but to sit around and scroll for an hour instead of sitting down with my kids, like, that's something I totally do. And so I have to recognize that there should be boundaries around even use of stuff like that. Like, actually, I'm not going to get on until my kids go to bed, because they deserve to have a present mum. Like, and if you're not present, you are absent, even if you're in the same house as them. They want that connection with you. So I recognize that for that generation, they didn't have the tools and the understanding that we even have now. So in some ways, like, it's easier to look back at our parents' generation and be like, oh my gosh, they were all so terrible, they didn't know how to do this and that, but they had even less than what we did, and we're still struggling. So I think for me, I just try to take responsibility for the things I can change for myself and be better for myself and my children. And I'm sure, my kids are going to grow up and be like, oh, my mum did this, someone's always going to have something. So, I wonder what all our kids are going to say about our generation.
Yeah, digitally distracted parenting. It is
exactly, which I'm totally guilty of. I put my hand up.
I'm mindful of it. I can be bad of it too. Exactly. I'm the same as you. I don't drink, I don't use drugs, etc., but I can be on my phone way too much. But I'm trying, and I think in fact, I will say I'm way better, particularly when my stepson is around.
Yeah.
Because
being conscious of it, eh?
Yeah, I'm conscious of it, and I leave it in the car when I go to dinners and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because particularly
otherwise you ended up with it on your table even when you're having dinner, and you're like, why am I even doing this?
I know. And from a mental health outcomes point of view, it's really fucking bad for us.
Yeah.
And I think it's socially divisive and socially corrosive. So just for anyone who might not be up to speed, Is Not Your Rehab is around creating violence-free families and violence-free communities.
Yes.
How do you teach those skills? You've written a self-help book. Yeah. What is it that you want people to know? How can they do, how can they be part of their change?
Well, I guess for us, the book was an extension of the work that we did in real life. And so because Matt was a barber and obviously had men in the barbershop and obviously created these sorts of conversations, well, initially it was just him and one guy, because his barbershop was a shed in Aranui with one chair. And then it grew to obviously a bigger shop, and then it grew to a prison program, and then men's therapy groups that would run from the shop. And, I think for us, our whole movement stems on the belief that your childhood trauma was not your fault, but your healing is your responsibility. And so first up, I think for anyone to get to a place of real healing, you actually have to take responsibility for it. And so our movement is really about encouraging that, and just looking at tools and strategies and ways of being able to break the cycle yourself. That's not dependent on someone else apologizing to you, or not dependent on someone else doing something that you're expecting. Because for a lot of us, we're never going to get the apologies we deserve. That's just the reality. And we can sit here and be upset about it. We can feel victimized by it. We can do whatever, but it's not actually going to move you forward in your life. And so Matt and I were both people who recognized that we were never probably going to hear what we needed to hear from people in our lives that had harmed and hurt us. So we just decided to accept the apology that we never got, and actually just do our best to move on and to break cycles and address patterns in our life that we didn't want to pass on to our children. And that's kind of been our incentive. Really, the work has come from the work we started off within ourselves. So everything we teach is genuinely what we've practiced ourselves. I remember growing up with parents who I never ever heard apologize. Never once would they ever admit that they did anything wrong. It just wasn't done. And so now, even if I think, oh, that was a bit harsh, like I, told my son off without really even thinking about it, and you can see it's like it affects him. My son's very sensitive and like cries, like he'll, like if you've hurt his heart, as he'll say, he'll cry. And me as a mum, I've got to learn to humble myself and go, son, I'm really sorry for telling you off without even really asking your side of the story, and be a different kind of mum from the one I saw, and sit with him and go, you know what, mum really made a mistake there, and I'm so sorry. And you're never going to be perfect. None of us are ever going to be perfect parents. There's no such thing. But I genuinely believe that we can be more conscious with the way that we parent, and more conscious with the way that we react, and more conscious with the way that we go about to own our humanity. Like, I'm going to make mistakes, but I can apologize to my children. I can actually sit with them and talk through feelings that upset them, or, I think when I was growing up, I remember having a lot of my feelings dismissed quite a lot. And even though I'm a believer now that your feelings aren't always an accurate gauge to what's really going on in your life, if I went on my feelings, I would be rejected and abandoned all my life. So a lot of the times I've had to learn to sit with myself and go, you might feel like that, but that is not the truth for your life. And that is not the truth that you're going to believe and act on. But even with my children, I try to, like, my son will, get upset about something, and I sit there and go, it's actually okay to feel like that. I understand that you're feeling sad, but here's another option, or can we talk about this? And so you can still validate their emotions, but also give them different perspectives to consider, and especially when both of them, like I've got my two little ones that are like having a little fight together. They're actually usually pretty good most of the time, but they'll have their moments. And so they'll both have their version of the story. And it's just teaching them new ways to be, I guess, emotionally aware. And I never got any of this training when I was growing up. Like, my parents never ever parented us like that. So for me, our work is helping people to be the parents that they never saw, but that they know that they deserved, and therefore they know their children deserve. And so that's kind of my passion, because when you really work with men, sometimes men that are in the system, they might be doing time, but that they're going to get released at some point and go back to their family, to kind of encourage them with little things that they can learn and take away that will impact their whānau when they get out. Like, that just means everything to us. Like, we are so passionate about it. Like, and so many times, like you'll, like, there was one guy I remember in one of our prison programs, and he was about a year off being released, and he hadn't really been very strong in his children's life because he had had extensive jail time. And he sat down and we were talking, we always share in a group, and he was like, I really want to be a better dad. Like, that's my goal. When I get out, I really want to be a good dad to my kids. I don't want to come back in here, but I also am scared because I've never really done this, and I haven't had good parenting and all that. And so we were just like, over the weeks that we spent with him, we would just give him little tools and tricks to start with. And we started it with how he interacted with his children when he would ring them to speak to them. And he said to me, I feel like I don't have any right to be their dad because I've missed so much of their life. And I said, but the thing is, you can always show up now. Like, you don't have yesterday, but you have today. And so we just gave him little like encouragements of how to interact with him on the phone. And he sent a message to us through the psychologist in the unit. And she said, oh, he just wants to tell you that actually it's really changed the way he interacts with his kids, and he's feeling more confident about being released and being back in their life as their dad. And, you know, when you sit with men like this, who you know haven't had the easiest ride, they didn't have good upbringings, but just to give them the time to really help them with new insights, not practically with their relationships, it's just, yeah, it's everything.
It is everything. That's super powerful. So it sounds like you're teaching a very fine balance between self-responsibility and self-ownership. And the word empowering gets, I think, misused all the time, but actually empowering people to take control of their lives and change things.
Yeah.
And at the same time, sensitivity and emotional vulnerability.
Yeah,
And
that's a big one.
I think that's quite the balance, right? Because
Yeah.
I feel, at least in my reading of social media and the public space, it's one or the other for some people. You're like David Goggins, Marine, hoorah, stay hard, which appeals to me. I mean, look at me.
Yeah.
Or there's almost which I think is too extreme, because you do have to feel your feelings and be emotionally expressive and have moments of rest and pause and reflection. And at the other end of the extreme, I feel there's a real victimhood culture, and
Yeah.
and
Oh,
and
huge.
and 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 people's wounding and trauma is their identity, and they put it in their bio,
Absolutely.
and that and then becomes who they are, and there's no impetus to change. Do you think that's a fair reading of the kind of
Yeah.
the polarized nature of social media at the moment?
I think, to be honest, social media just amplifies the world we live in, right? So it
Sure.
brings out that you see the very best, but you see the very worst. And I think that this space is no different. I feel like, I mean, I can only go on my own experience. And because when you grow up a certain way, and I grew up as an adopted child who always felt abandoned, rejected, not wanted. And so my whole life, everything sort of revolved around that, not consciously, but I would always sort of seek out, they're not going to like me, no one's going to like me, or I'm going to get in a relationship, they're going to break up with me, so I will just quickly end it before they do. Or if I go for a job interview, what if they don't pick me? That's because they don't like me, because I'm not good enough. Like, this is just how my talk was. And so I guess I was a victim to that for many years. I really believed it, and I didn't know any different. And that's the thing. Like, I believe a lot of people don't know any different if they've only ever lived like that, and that's been their reality, their life. You coming along and going, hey, there's another way to live, it's not always going to be met so well. And I think I've learned that to help people on their healing journey, you have to go at people's pace. And walk alongside them. Like, it's not for me to force someone into a path they don't want to go down. But I think for me, I kind of got to the place in my life where I was like, I don't want to feel like this for the rest of my life. I don't want this to be my reality for the rest of my life. What can I do to change that? Because if I'm going to wait around for my parents to give me some validation or someone to tell me I belong, I might be waiting forever. Like, like it might not ever happen. Yeah. And I just don't want to live a life that's victim to other people's choices. So I had to go, okay, what do I need to do in order to change the things I can change? I can't change the fact that I was adopted. I can't make people want to love me or want me or anything, but I can love and want myself. I can go into this world knowing that I belong to myself. I can find people that support the way that I think and believe now. My husband totally supports, you belong, like, you're worthy, like, he'll talk to me in that way too. So I think that people are victim to things when sometimes what's familiar to you is actually like the only reality, and sometimes the unknown, the healing, all the other stuff on the other side, that seems more scary than actually what you already know and what's familiar to you. And I guess my encouragement to people like that is that deep down, you'll know that you want something more. Like, I know I did. I wanted a life where I didn't feel like that all the time. And so my encouragement is to say to yourself, like, yep, you've done so well, you've survived up to this point, but how is all of this working for you? And actually, if you want more, you deserve more. And there is another way to live. And that's about taking responsibility for your path.
Have you seen the film American History X with Edward Norton?
No, I don't think so.
I might be a little older than you, but it was it was a huge film when it came out,
Yeah.
and it might be challenging for anyone listening to this who hasn't seen it. But are you familiar with the actor Edward Norton?
A little bit.
Wow, yeah, I'm definitely older than you. He was the man. He's in Fight Club, and you're like, I haven't seen Fight Club.
I don't know
Oh,
type of films though. I mean, I could probably list
I
off
know
a
you're
whole range of
good.
romantic comedies for you.
Okay, to tie into the story that you just shared with me, Edward Norton in this film he becomes a neo-Nazi skinhead after his father is murdered by some African American gangsters, right? And he goes down this journey and ends up in prison. Eventually, comes out of prison, and he's sitting with his African American high school teacher, like the one teacher who was cool with him, and the fact that he's African American really challenges his his white supremacist racist worldview. And the teacher generally asks him, I don't know why I feel emotional talking about it, but he says, has anything you've done up till now made your life better? And the character breaks down in tears and he says no, and because he's been through this trauma in prison and stuff. And it really is the moment when he loses racism.
Mm.
And you see him change throughout. He grows his hair back, he starts covering up his racist tattoos. But the tragedy of it is that his little brother had started adopting some of his views and you should really watch the film if you want to see it. And
Yeah, I think I do
it becomes a really tragic film, but it really makes me think about what you've just shared, because the men that I know who have got into drugs and violence and gangs may have killed people, may have been incarcerated. It hasn't made their lives better, and what they're doing, as more than 90% of the population is really just trying to hide them. It's just mask up over that pain, right? And yet it doesn't work. It works to a point, but it doesn't work forever.
It doesn't work forever.
And
What's in will always come out. And I always think of, when I think of people like that are, I guess, and addicted, or they're trying to cover up or mask their pain, I always think of that Gaba Mate quote that says, it's not why the addiction, it's why the pain.
yeah, word up.
I love that. I love him. He's one of my favorites.
I just signed up to do a thing with him.
He's amazing.
Have you seen that film, The Wisdom of Trauma? That
Yes,
yeah, I
love him. Just love everything about him. Would love to meet him and hug him and tell him that he's just
my partner did a year-long course with him, like a year-long
I think you did say that to me.
On like trauma-informed inquiry.
Yeah,
because I think that's what you deliver with Is Not Your Rehab, working within prisons and the book you've written and all the outreach work you do. Speaking Matt does, your partner. It's trauma informed, right? And that's why it resonates with hundreds of thousands of people around the world.
Well, you just have to understand that no one really is born to hate people. No one's born violent. And so when you remind yourself of that, we were all at one stage an innocent baby, and unfortunately that baby has grown and different things have happened to harden them, to make them sad, to make them fearful, all these different things. And then and everyone reacts differently. Some people shut themselves off, some people react with violence, some people become addicted. Like, there's so many outcomes. But when I see the men that we work with, and we do work predominantly with men, I've learned this from Matt, but I said, how do you see the men that you sit with? Because he's just so empathetic, and not in a way that condones anything that they've done, but just in a way that really chooses to see their humanity. And he said, every single man that's ever sat in my chair, I always see him as a little boy. And I always think about that, because we've gone to some interesting places in different prisons with some interesting people that you would see and you'd think, oh, he's scary or whatever. But Matt's like, I always just see the little boy in him. There was once a little boy and someone hurt him. And so I choose to address that little boy I don't really target the person I see in front of me. And when you think about how you would speak and interact with a child who had been hurt, a child who's been abused, a child who's been a victim themselves, it changes the way you speak to them. And you know, we've actually copped a lot of hate for working with the people we do. We've copped a lot of people who, you know, why would you want to work with perpetrators, and why would you want to do this? And Matt's always like, well, if we don't work with them, what's the alternative? We just lock them up and throw away the key, because that hasn't worked for us. That hasn't worked in our, you know, incarceration system. And he always comes from a place because he was a little boy whose dad went to prison for violence, and he said, I really used to wish that somebody would help my dad, and that when he came home, he would be different for us. And no one ever did. And that it was, you know, that era was probably even worse for a Samoan man that couldn't really speak English in prison. So he said he would just come out the same, or if not worse. And so Matt's like, it's amazing what, you know, just human connection and empathy can do for someone. It's not about knowing, you know, the top 20 ways of overcoming your whatever it is. It's not about a program. It's not about anything. It's actually about genuine connection, genuine whanaungatanga, genuinely walking alongside people and believing that redemption is always going to be possible as long as we're alive. And people actually ask us, do you actually believe that redemption is possible for everybody? And I would say we have to choose to believe that, even if sometimes some people's outcomes would show us otherwise. We have to choose that it's not up to us to decide who it's possible for and who it's not, because that would impact on our work. So yeah, that's a little snapshot.
Yeah, it's an incredibly compassionate take. And yeah, I talk about this a lot, how often people who profess to want a kind of better world are actually so unforgiving.
Mm.
And I find that quite interesting that you receive hate for, I don't know.
Lots of hate.
Like, yeah, yeah, because you really like lots of hate, like a daily sort of tirade of.
Not daily, but when it comes, it comes. If someone won't like something we've posted to do with something, and they'll get a whole range of people to message you about it. And like, I'm just trying to think of an incident. So Matt supported a hui recently down here in Otatahi with the man that was racist on the media.
Oh, kia ora, yes. I'm familiar with that.
And
yeah.
So he came to us, he sought us out, and Matt's feeling was, well, at the end of the day, like what you've talked about harms people, and people like me, brown brothers, you know. But if we won't hold these sorts of conversations, which are hard to have, how are we making it better for our sons? Like, he's like, I think about my children. I want a better world for them. So I'm going to have the courage to have hard conversations now. And so we facilitated a hui at a barbershop with local kaumātua and some mental health professionals for him. And it was actually a really good, it was a good start. I'm not going to say it like it's going to solve everything, but I do believe kanohi ki te kanohi, like face to face is always preferable. And, you know, people didn't like that. They were like, oh, you know, and we got a lot of, you know, I guess feedback from our own community. Why would you want to help him, or, you know, anything? But Matt's thing was, well, the kaupapa the calling that I have in my life is that I won't turn a man away if he reaches out for help. And so that applies to murderers, that applies to racists, you know, that applies to whatever label you want to put on it. If I can facilitate some kind of conversation that will somehow make this world better, then I will. So that's what that, you know, he does get, you know, feedback from that. And I'm not saying, and we're definitely not saying that that should be something that everybody does. I feel like different people are called to do different things. The kaumātua that attended with us, I mean, they were really, really, really good with him. Not every single Māori person should have to sit and do what they did. They wanted to, though. You know, everybody has their different roles and what they can handle or what they want to do. And so, yeah, you definitely don't get good feedback. And then we get people that go on this rampage of, you know, you're just enabling perpetrators. You're just blah, blah, blah. Why don't you help the victims? And Matt's like, but I kind of am trying to help the victims, because once they were victims, and actually if you don't help them, they're going to make more victims.
That's it. There's no offenders, there's no victims.
Exactly. So it's a hard situation. I don't think the work, I mean, Matt's he's made friends with the fact that some people won't like him and they won't like the work, and he's like, that's okay with me. I guess I'm going to be true to the calling I feel in my life, the work I feel that I need to do.
It really strikes me that you see the heart of a human rather than the label. Whether the label is the crime that they committed, whether it's murder or rape or domestic violence, or the shitty beliefs that they have, like racism or sexism. You see the person outside of that. And I think that's something that we're losing at the moment.
I do. I actually feel like labels have never served any of us.
Yeah.
I feel it's easy for us to box someone and go, right, he's that or she's this, and like that's it for them. I actually feel like that very binary thinking where someone is all good or all bad is absolutely nonsense, because I know for sure that there's good in the worst of us and bad in the best of us. Like we're human beings, we're all flawed, there's just nuanced days for all of us, you know. Like if you pushed me enough, like okay, I'll tell you right now, I'm capable of murdering somebody. If I saw somebody harming my children in front of my eyes, I would absolutely do what I needed to do to protect them. So I could literally, like I've seen, you know, cases where parents in that position have ended up killing someone. I definitely could put my hand up and say that would be me. Like I know that mother instinct of wanting to protect your child so much could just come over, and you could be that person. Does that mean that I'm now just a murderer? That's all I am. Like I don't believe that. And so I just think that we have to see humanity for what it is. Like everybody's going to have different things, and I'm not like there's always going to be the 1%, the guy that, I'm not even going to say his name, the guy that shot dead the 51 people in the mosque shooting. He's never going to get paroled. So he's given life without parole. He'll be jailed indefinitely, as he should be. There's no rehabilitation for him. And so I believe that you're not going to go on everybody being like him. Do you know what I mean? Like
he's the extreme end of it.
Yeah, there's always going to be the extreme examples, or the people that are so mentally unwell that they probably won't be able to have the support needed to rehabilitate into a normal society. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to try with the people that we work with. We're not going to treat people differently. We're just going to, we want to be able to provide empathy and compassion for everybody that we work with.
Where can people pick up your book, Is Not Your Rehab, which is is it 10 step? How many steps in the book?
There's no steps. There's 21 chapters.
21 chapters. And each chapter is a focus on different things to make your relationship
exactly.
healthier.
They can get it anywhere. So it is available in all the bookshops. It's available online. Matt even did an audio book.
And you have it free in prisons too, right?
Yep. So we've made a big order from Penguin. We raised $100,000, and that bought us enough copies for every single person in prison to have one if they want one. And we've also just done another collaboration with Rotary, the Rotary clubs, and they've raised money for Women's Refuge to have copies. So they're going out to different refuges. So we're trying to make the work accessible. We're trying to make the learning accessible for people. We want people that need to read it or have the tools or insights to have it. We don't want accessibility to be a problem. So it's available everywhere.
With your, because you have the book in prisons, and a lot of guys in prison are illiterate, like, do you have people who like facilitate workshops reading it, or what?
That's going to be something that we've actually done an audio book. So we're speaking to corrections about making that available via Prison TV. So there's a whole range of things. That was actually the heart of why Matt bothered doing an audio book, because it wasn't actually an easy audio book to record. Obviously, a lot of the stuff is, it's very, very sad and very real for Matt. He had just lost his mum, and some of the chapters are about her in the book. And so he said, sitting there reading it out is like really quite hard to keep your tone steady while you're crying yourself. but he said he pushed through because he was like, I just thought of all the men that do struggle with literacy, which is, you know, a high number in prison. And he said, and I just don't want the reading to be a barrier. So that's why he pushed through into the audiobook.
Oh, that's choice. That's really, really amazing. Where can people, where can people find you, and how can people help? Like, if people want to help She Is Not Your Rehab, how
We've
can
never
they?
really done donations or anything, because we've kind of always self-funded our work. We've done it through our businesses, and then we've actually been really grateful to receive, you know, little bits of government funding here and there for certain projects, like the wānanga that you attended. Like, they paid the cost of the wānanga, so all the men that attended could come for free. And we're very grateful for that. But we kind of haven't really set up in the fact of like, hey, we're taking donations or anything. I think if you really wanted to help, what we would appreciate is just purchasing the book and sharing that, like donating, like buy books and donate to local refuges, or there's all sorts of places. There's heaps of agencies that want them that, you know, probably don't have heaps of funding. So just things like that would be really appreciated. Or even buying our t-shirts. The t-shirts, we made them to start conversation, and it has started conversation. Like, I think you've worn one quite a bit. But we got so many letters in from people that have worn it around the world going, oh my gosh, whenever I wear your t-shirt, I always get stopped and people talk to me about this stuff. Like, so we feel that's really cool, because it's just basically, you know, it's starting those conversations which we as a society need to have.
Yeah, that's it, right? It is just 1,001, 1,000,001, 1,000,000,001 patient conversations.
Yeah.
That is ultimately gonna lead to the changes that we desperately need in our world to make.
If we all did something little, this is how I feel we would make a big impact. Like, Matt and I, like, our passion is obviously violence-free, whānau, violence-free communities. This is what we live and breathe. This is what we spend our life doing. But I just think to myself, what would this world look like if each of us were just committed in some small way to impacting their community, their whānau, their area for the better? And you could, you know, I know there's people that are really passionate about animals, so they, you know, volunteer with the SPCA. There's other people that are passionate about, you know, climate change or trees or whatever, and they volunteer. Like, if everybody just did one thing, I honestly believe that is how we would raise consciousness and change our world.
Well, this has been an inspiring conversation, and I think that's a really beautiful, uplifting note to finish on, given that a lot of what you talk about is emotionally heavy. If anyone wants to get in touch with you, where can they do that?
So we have a website, sheisnotyourrehab.com. We're on Facebook, Instagram. We do get a lot of messages, and we can't always get back to people straight away. Like, both of us work full time and have, you know, a lot of kids. So it's not always possible that we're sitting there running back to, but we do try our best. But yeah, our website's the best way of getting in touch. Matt does speak. Well, actually, Matt and I do now some stuff together, but we do speak at different events, and if people want us for that, then they can contact us on our website. Your t-shirts are available there, books are available everywhere, and yeah, that's us.
Sarah, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me, and I'm really proud to be in alignment with you and Matt and friends, and you know, in the same
It's been
space.
awesome. Oh, it's been awesome meeting you, Richie. I've always been grateful because of the similar work we've done. And I think for Matt as well, it's just nice to meet other men in this space. You know, people like you and our friends at Men's Medicine in Australia, and just different people that are in their own way really trying to be a proactive part of, you know, raising consciousness and creating violence-free, you know, communities. We're always so happy to meet people that are that way inclined, and I'll always be grateful for the MSD team that hooked us all up and how we all got to meet. And because it sometimes can be quite, you'll probably feel this, but it can be quite a lonely space sometimes when you don't know anyone else that really is that passionate about it. And so it's nice to connect with other people that really, you know, are going above and beyond. Like, I mean, for all of us, it's not even our job.
No,
Like,
it's your life, hey? It's a life.
Yeah, it's your life. And so when people go, oh, you know, blah blah blah, you're doing. I'm like, we don't actually get paid to do this, and we don't work for the government, we don't work for the police, we don't work for corrections. We literally are willingly doing this because we really believe in the kaupapa. So it's lovely to meet other people who feel similar.
Well, I feel the same. Hey, this has been real fun. I know you have somewhere to be, so again, thank you so much. I will look forward to seeing you in person once I can leave the city I'm stuck in.
Yay. Thank you, Richie.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.